remember calling up and being like, excuse me, I think my check is wrong. Like, you gave me too much money. And she was like, no, honey, that's what you make now. And I was like,
Economic geologists. What exactly do they do? Are they in the field, in the office? How much money do they make? Is this an environmentally friendly career? Let's ask one.
hello, my name's Elizabeth Freeman. I'm an economic geologist here in Anchorage, Alaska, and I own a marketing agency called Nuna LLC.
Amazing. Alaska. Oh my God. I'm so excited for this conversation. I want to start with just economic geology and general kind of what is it? I feel like when we put together the words economic and geologist, a lot of people just picture like gold and silver. But is it more than that? What is, economic geology, and what does being an economic geologist mean from like a broad general scale?
I love that. So economic geology to me, anyway, I don't know the textbook definition, but it's we are the flavor of geologists who do care about economic resources. So that is your gold, copper, silver, but those minerals are so much more broad. Like look around where you are listening to this. Everything you look at is either derived from petroleum or minerals. So all of those things have to come from somewhere. So economic geologists, our role is to assess where are those resources located? What is their quantity? So to make a resource economic, the value has to be high enough to justify the cost of extracting the resource. And also like looking at commodity prices, there are people who kind of follow how it impacts like overall like geopolitical relationships and things of that nature. So when you're thinking about economic geology, it's definitely econs in the name, but we do exploration as well. So to me, it's like, where are these minerals located? How can we extract them responsibly? It's like that whole chain is, I think, under that economic geologist umbrella.
Okay. Okay. So it's the exploration part. You're finding where are these deposits. And then it's the how can we extract them in an economic way, in a way that, falls under keeping within environmental regulations, all of these things.
Mhm.
And that's really interesting because I had always wondered. I mean, I've been in academia, I'm not super well versed within industry, but I always wondered if economic geologists, I always hear it in a hard rock
Mhm.
context or more of a mining context than an oil and gas
Mhm.
context. Is it like the oil and gas people that find the oil, are they exploration geologists and the mining people are economic geologists? Or can there be economic geologists that work in the oil and gas industry? Like, where's the line?
I love that. And that's an interesting question because I do know, like, you have geophysicists and you have petrographers, and so, are petrologists. So I know there's different flavors, but yeah, I believe, and I guess since oil is not technically, like, we don't consider that, I guess, a mineral, but it's definitely a
Yeah.
natural resource. So I do know that there
Yeah.
is exploration involved as well. I'm actually in the last semester of my grad program, and I'm thinking about transferring some of my skill set into petroleum because usually gold, silver, copper, those things don't usually fluctuate. They don't usually tank with oil prices. So usually they kind of go in tandem back and forth. So as a
Yeah.
geologist, you could have a pretty substantial career potentially working in both, working in mining until the gold prices drop below $5,000 an ounce or whatever, and then go into oil when oil prices are more favorable. So
Oh, I never thought about that. That's
yeah, I've
interesting.
met a couple geologists recently who've had illustrious careers doing that, but it also depends on just kind of the timing of it all. For example, when I graduated in my undergrad in 2015, oil was not doing well. So nobody was hiring biostratigraphers, which is what I wanted to do initially. And so I had to kind of pivot into an industry that was hiring, and that was mining at the time. But I know one of my mentors remembers when gold prices were much, much lower. Nobody was
Yeah.
drilling, nobody was exploring, so people weren't hiring, exploration geologists like that. So if you get into economic geology, you have to remember these are dictated by commodity prices and
Yeah.
dictated by geopolitical tensions and things like that. So you can't always predict what that's going to look like.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like too, and this also gets into the next question, which is why, and I feel like you kind of already answered this because resources, but why is economic geology important to society? I feel like the answer to that is at its most basic level because we need rocks and deposits and things to live, to get energy and whatnot. But I'm also curious, has the definition of economic geology and what it means to be an economic geologist broadened with this new push toward mining for critical minerals? And have you been involved in any of that, or do you know other economic geologists
Yeah,
that have?
absolutely. I can speak on it a little bit in the sense that I had worked a project. My thesis is actually on this project, but it's a gold project here in Alaska, and it's interesting though because initially it was just a gold project, and then later on they found antimony on the project. So antimony is a critical mineral, and so now this project is getting a lot of federal funding and a lot of different attention based upon the fact that
Yeah,
it also, in addition to the gold, now it could be potentially an antimony project as well. And we have a lot of those projects that are polymetal to where they can give us,
right.
gold and copper, because copper got placed on the list as well, So in that sense, it's not just about those specific resources, but our big push right now is domestic production of resources. So for your viewers, just to understand, like I said, the geopolitical aspect of this is quite significant, and I think has always been. If you look at the spikes in our gold production in the United States, they coincide with times of war, World War II being a really good example, when we needed to secure resources for our country and use that money, use those resources to then fund defense other places. So it does have big implications, especially with like tariffs going on right now. Some of the countries who do have the lion's share of some of these minerals are not quite our friends. So that's raised a lot of concerns in our country anyway, as to A, do we have these resources in our country, which some of these minerals we just do not, based on the
Yeah,
geological processes that occurred in our country versus China, for example. So, certain rare earths we don't have. China may be the only
yeah.
producer of these minerals. So there's those things. And then try to figure out, well, okay, do we have copper deposits here? Yes, we do. Can we develop those? It takes quite a bit of time to develop these resources from exploration into a mine. And in
Right.
that time, a lot of things can happen. So politics gets pulled in, the geology gets pulled in. It's kind of this bigger story, but it's not just about the gold.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think it's much broader than many people, and than I once thought. I never knew really the scope
Mhm.
of economic geology until I started really getting into geology, obviously. So yeah, it is pretty incredible, and you can kind of take it in a lot of different directions. Which brings me to one of my favorite questions, which is always, what does a typical day or week look like for you on the job, and
Oh
how much are
gosh.
you in the field versus at a computer?
Well, now I'm not anywhere fun because I'm in school, but actually I take that back. My advisor has been lovely, and for those of you in school who I did this, full disclaimer, I guess I should say, I did this kind of in reverse to most people. I did my undergrad and then I moved to Alaska shortly after, and then like maybe a year later I actually went into the mining industry. So I worked in the mining industry until, was that 2021-ish, and then I went back to school. And then I worked while I went to school, which is why I'm still in school. But it gave me a really interesting perspective because I was kind of going into it as a working person. And then I went into academia. It's been an interesting road, but usually the day of an economic geologist, like when I was working at either we have production and exploration. So I should clarify that production sites, active mining is happening or is being extracted and being processed in a mill, turned into concentrate. That concentrate is then shipped out across the world to be processed at smelters, which we don't really have a lot of those in our country. But, I logged a lot of core. So whether it's surface drilling, underground drilling, they take these really cool diamond drills, awesome drillers. They extract the core from the core barrel. They put it in these core boxes, whether that's, wood boxes, whatever. I've seen plenty of different types of boxes, but we put the core in there, and then you're like the only person on site that knows the language, right? So I always equate it to like being able to translate a book for people that don't know the language. So they give you the core, you
Oh,
take it, you're now analyzing it quantitatively and qualitatively for its mineral composition, right? Is this the rock that's going to have the resources that we want, the favorable conditions that we're looking for? Depending on whatever deposit style that is, those signals are different, but you're logging the core,
yeah.
then you're passing that off to core cutters and people like that who then process the samples that you've just made. And then that gets sent out for fire assay. And that's how we primarily find out if we're on target, what the
Oh,
grade
okay.
of the gold is. So how concentrated is our sample? How much gold is concentrated in that sample, or silver, or whatever you're looking for. And that's how we're able to target, where we are. Or if I'm on target and I know here's a big juicy vein, we're drilling in it, I want to keep in that vein. So I will still be analyzing those samples to make sure. And sometimes you can hit something that looks juicy and it doesn't run anything. So at that point, it's not economically viable to continue. So all of those things have to kind of be happening all the time just to make sure that we're always on our target. Outside of core logging, though, I've done a lot of field work. So a lot of geology, I feel like you could say too, is what you make of it. So if you want to be in economic geology and don't want to be in the office, there's resource modeling and things like that. These are the people who take the data that someone like myself would have collected, then they put it into a Leapfrog or Vulcan or some other modeling software. And then they're the ones who make the block models. They're the ones who manipulate that data into a way that the engineering team can then come in and use for blasting and stuff like that. So we all work in this big, beautiful team. So again, economic geologist, in my opinion anyway, is not just like one task. Field mapping is another one, soil sampling. You can actually trace these veins to surface a lot of times. So sometimes you'll go underground and see a vein. You can actually find it again on surface. So yeah, there's lots of different things you can do. But unfortunately, like today, my life consists of writing my thesis and class and colloquiums
Yeah.
and stuff like that. But I did actually last winter had my first opportunity to be a project manager of an exploration
Oh,
project.
cool.
So based on the skill set that I've gained so far, I wasn't actually doing any geology. I was kind of overseeing the daily operations of the whole project. So working in relationships with the drill foreman or, the cooks and things like that, but just like orchestrating who's coming into camp, who's leaving, drill crew change,
Oh.
and going into the core shack, but being able to liaison with the geologist and say, hey, how much footage did you log today? Are there any issues? What are you seeing in the core? Do you need help, moving core boxes, like whatever? So you can have a managerial role as well under that
Yeah.
economic geologist umbrella, I think. So it's not
Oh,
just
wow.
grunt work all the time, which is how I started. But I do believe there is room for upward mobility. And again, whatever
Yeah.
that looks like for you.
Yeah, yeah. I That's a common thread we've seen through a lot of these interviews with geologists is, your career is often what you want from it, what you
Right.
want to make of it.
Yep.
And it's, if you want to be in the field more, you often get kind of, I mean, you get that choice, but obviously there's restrictions, but you get to choose whether, you go down a path that is a lot more field heavy versus going down a path that is a lot less field heavy.
Absolutely.
I'm also curious, when you were doing the core logging, were you like in a lab somewhere? Were you on site, or like where'd you get to go?
That's a great question. So core shacks are usually either on site at the production mine that I worked on. There's, different facilities, everywhere. There's like the warehouse, the admin building, blah, blah, blah. So they had like a designated core yard where they put a lot of the core that was done being logged, like they call it the graveyard or whatever. So like you put the core there, but also where the core is being dropped off. So like the laydown. So every day, especially on a production mine, there's multiple rigs running at a time, and they run 24/7. So at any given moment, someone should be bringing you new rocks, right, from wherever.
Oh, that's
It's
amazing.
cool. It is really cool because, yeah, you get to kind of see the whole process like every day. And then in exploration, drilling programs, and this is in general, but it's all controlled, dictated by money, by funding. So if I
Mm.
didn't have a big cash here, maybe I can only afford two or three rig drill program. But hey, if gold prices are high and I got some new investors, maybe I can do a six drill program, which in that case, I'm going to get a lot of core and I'm going to need a lot of geologists to help me analyze all of that. So
Oh.
usually the law is like, one rig, one geo kind of thing. But in exploration, it's a little slower sometimes because you don't have so many rigs turning, but the process is the same. I've been in a core tent on an airstrip before. I've been in a core shack that was like a mile off of a trail. So, it just depends. They try to put them in places that are away from other people, away from other operations, because the core itself is expensive once you've drilled it. You don't want it getting destroyed or, ran over or whatever.
Ah,
But also, it has to be stacked and housed somewhere. So it has to be an area that you've got enough space to put the facility, put all the core, and then put the core when it's done being logged. But the core shacks are cool. Like usually I've worked in ones that are tents that were literally like open to the elements in the summertime, which was actually kind of nice. It was like beautiful summer breeze and, the mosquitoes not so great, but, and I've worked in like more structured warehouses, like some bigger projects with a little more funding will make these big core warehouses where they have like water hoses that come down from the ceiling, really kind of a little more high tech. So it really depends on the
oh,
company and kind of the money allocated for their core
yeah.
logging facility. But I've seen the range and they all have relatively the same things in them. It's just like the Mercedes, water sprayer or like the Costco water sprayer, like there's a difference.
Love that. Oh my God, I love that so much. Okay, so yeah, that actually provides a lot of great context as to like what you kind of do day to day, depending on which path you go down. But I'm curious, and I'm curious based on your story because you did say you kind of went backwards. But what initially inspired you to pursue this career in economic geology?
Yeah. I'm from Ohio. And so I was really into fossils growing up just because invert fossils are everywhere. You know what I mean? And I took that for granted, I guess, because I was like, everybody sees bryozoans every day. And that's not true. But yeah, I was bit by the bug, I guess, from a very, very early age. And then when I got into my undergrad, I did an internship at UMass with Dr. Mark Lecky. Shout out, Mark. But he's a micropaleontologist and his specialty is forams. So he got me into forams. Then he was like, everybody goes into industry, at some point. And I was like, I was actually quite a big greeny tree hugger. And I was like, I am not working for the oil industry. And he was like, it's just what it is. Like we apply our science to industry and that's why we become geologists so they can use it. So I always kind of remembered him saying that. And so then I moved to Alaska, oil tanked. I didn't get into UMass's grad program. So I was like, okay. So I was like, I'll do something else. Well, when I moved to Alaska at the time, we had 6 mines. Now I think we have 7. But everyone said, "Oh, you're a geologist? Like, you should work in mining." And they're like, "Oh, you'll have no problems getting a job up here." And I was like, I never heard of that. Like to me, I was like, I'm not going to get a job in mining. Like, who told you that? So, but it's true. Geotemp is a really good program, really good company. I had heard from them, I think from like a career fair maybe or something. And I remember being super green. Like, hard rock was not my thing. I thought I was going to be a soft set girly. I thought I was going to be the 4am queen. So I was like, I don't know anything about ore or sulfides or any of that.
Yeah,
But they were like, hey, we have this position open at this production mine. They have a backlog. They need people to come in and hit it hard and like catch it up. And I was like, again, no context. I'm like, sure, I will do that. And that was kind of what kicked it off. And once I started production, it was just like my whole life opened up. I had never made money like that before. I was
mm,
young. I made the joke that I never seen a check with the comma in it before. You know what I mean? I remember calling up and being like, excuse me, I think my check is wrong. Like, you gave me too much money. And she was like, no, honey, that's what you make now. And I was like,
oh
oh,
my
yeah, it was
God.
like game changer. But also, like, seeing things for what they really are in some cases is also really refreshing. I know growing up, coal country is all I knew of the mining industry. And that did not have a really favorable view when I was growing up. So that's kind of
Yeah,
my opinion when I was growing up was like mining bad, oil bad, and that's all I
right. Yeah.
knew. But when I got to site and like my first job was down in Juneau in probably one of the most beautiful places in Alaska. I mean, we're talking orca whales and like all
Oh,
that. And it's insane. And you have to take a boat to get to this site. And I just remember like my first hitch, being on this boat and the boat leaves like super early. So it's like 5 a.m. And then I get on the bus and go to site and it's just beautiful. And you're like, there's a mine up here? Like,
yeah.
it blew my mind.
Yeah.
And so that kind of helps shape, how I view the industry now. But it was kind of like, oh, there's not all this environmental degradation everywhere. Like, oh, there are people who actually really, really care about what the impact is and what that looks like and how we operate and try to do the best job we can. I got to see a lot of that stuff firsthand and like right away in my career.
Yeah.
So that kind of set the trajectory for me too of like, oh, this industry isn't so bad. There are great opportunities here for me potentially, and I can maybe embrace this and like see where I can take this. And I've had really good experiences so far. So I think that's why I'm such a big advocate now, because I'm like, this industry is great. I know we
Yeah.
have our things, but I think overall there's a lot of positives. I think we just don't talk about it enough.
Yeah, no, I think that that makes a lot of sense. We had Jess on, mining geologist, Mine Life Media, as our first interview
Yeah.
of this career podcast, and she talked a lot about how she also had those same misperceptions. I had those. A lot of people have those
Hmm.
misperceptions of like oil, gas bad, mining bad, and then you realize yes, they have environmental impact. They do have climatic impacts, but like one, we need energy. Like there's no perfect alternative that we can just cold turkey switch to yet.
Right.
And two, we need mining, especially for this transition
Yeah.
to clean energy because of all the critical minerals that we need and all the rare earth elements that we need
Yeah.
to make these, renewable technologies. There's so many reasons we need it. But then also Jess mentioned too, having, gotten to experience her first experience in mining was with this company that, yeah, did really actually try to make the most positive impact and minimize the environmental impacts as much as they could. And I think that is my dog
It's
is
like,
doing
oh, baby.
because of the squirrels. But anyway, yeah, they really did actually care, and Jess found like she had more power from inside than outside
Hmm.
to actually make change.
Right.
And I found that really insightful and encouraging. I think for people who want to go into geology or go into mining in the future, I think that's a big, you can make a lot of impact from that. And
Hmm.
there's a lot of, it's not just you, like there's a lot of people wanting to make these changes and
Absolutely.
whatnot. So
And you get to work with these people and learn. Like, I've learned so much. Like, when I was at that first job, I don't know where she is these days, but Cassie, if you're watching, she was head of the environmental team at this production mine. And her and this other gentleman, Pete, were super kind to me, taught me a lot about like what they did at the mine site and like their role in environmental regulations and like compliance and making sure that if, a little bit of diesel was spilled, from a truck leak or something, like what absorbent pads do we use, and making sure that as a geologist, even someone who's not necessarily around a lot of equipment, that I even was comfortable with like, okay, what color absorbent pad do I need to use if I see a small spill? Or who do I call if I see XYZ? Our core shack there was next to a stream, so we would see bears and all types of stuff all the time. But like, who do I call if I think I see a sick animal or whatever, But we
yeah,
all worked together. It wasn't like, oh, these three people on environmental take care of all that and everybody else just trashed the place. It was like we all felt
yeah,
ownership too of like, this is something we all take pride in. We take pride in our jobs. We take pride in this project. And we wanted to like show
yeah.
that and preserve that. So, I do think that's really important. And I don't know if we're going to get to this question, but also throughout my career, I was able to attend conferences and meet people and have colleagues and realize too, there's a lot of people right now who are looking into like microbes to extract, minerals and things like that. So
Yeah.
it's hard, and same thing in oil and gas. Honestly, a lot of the R&D being done for biofuels and a lot of that stuff is being done by petroleum companies because they have the resources to do the research. But the average person is never going to see what Chevron is doing, because we don't work for
Yeah.
Chevron. But I think kind of being behind the veil, working in the industry, and then going to these conferences, interacting, not just superficially
Yeah.
with people, I got to learn that behind the scenes, a lot of mining companies, again, are putting in the capital to do a lot of this R&D to do things better, running
Yeah.
equipment on biofuels or electric vehicles, that kind of stuff. Like that is actively happening, has been actively happening. But unless you're like in the industry, you really don't have any idea because it's not like we advertise it, unfortunately.
It's one of those things too that like yes, there's still a lot of not great things that
Hmm.
go on. There's still companies that aren't doing those
Totally.
as many of those good things and don't care as much, but like that's why we need more people like you, like Jess, like behind that curtain to
Right.
help, make those changes. Like these companies, yeah, they're big, a lot of them, but like they're still run by people. So
Right.
be those people. Like we need that change and
Totally.
we need people like that behind, inside of that.
And
But
young people,
but
because everyone's retiring. So it's like if we want a new
it's
generation of
true.
thinkers and people who want to try something new, I feel like now is like a perfect time to do that because, some of the old guard may have not had the same feelings about the environment that our
Yeah.
generation or the people, after us might be thinking. So it's like, now is the
Yeah.
time, like, get that degree, get into that field, because you would actually have a better chance, I think, nowadays having a voice and making those changes you're talking about than maybe like 20 years ago. So
Yeah,
I'm like,
absolutely. And that's a big thing, what you say about the retire. I mean, even like Julia, who was we had on from an oil and gas company, who, she worked for a smaller company, so there was a little bit more, she was a little bit more able to make those changes within her company. But like she says, like when she goes to conferences and things, like it's clear that there's a large portion of the higher ups that are very close to retirement age, if
it's
not past
close.
retirement age. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity and turnover happening.
Mhm.
And it's just like we know what we need to do, and we know we still need these industries. So let's make them what we need for the future.
Right.
And yeah, we spent a lot of time on this, so I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I just love that point. And I also want to highlight one other point you made about the biorecovery and
It's
bioremediation.
so cool.
So
It's
cool.
like blows my
I
mind.
made like videos when I was like baby Rachel like 4 years ago on those, and
Oh,
I think making an update with maybe one of those experts would be so
that
cool.
would
So
be
yeah, I
awesome.
hope.
See where it's come so far. Yeah, that'd be really
Yeah,
cool.
yeah, because yeah, that was one of the things when I was in grad school that would have been a possible like more industry related route for me,
Oh,
because I was
interesting.
working with microbes and how they interact with rock.
Oh, cool.
But yeah, like the aspect of that where you can actually remediate sites with microbes or recover,
Yeah, and
these
both.
economic
I think
minerals
that's the
with,
argument
yeah.
right now, is like, we have so many historical, brownfield sites. And so it's like, how many of these places could we technically go in, not only, make sure that these aren't going out into the water system, but then extracting these resources. So it's like the double whammy. It's like extracting resources from landfills. It's like we're getting so close now to being able to kind of make it a win-win for everybody, which I think most
Yeah.
people can get behind that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so that actually leads into the viewer questions quite nicely. A lot of viewers had so many great questions for this one, and I'm super excited for this. You kind of already hit on a lot of the, how the industry works with environmental consultants and environmental scientists to, regulate their environmental impact. But there's also a question: how has the push for environmental protections change the job of being an economic geologist? Like, have you seen in just your career that any changes being made?
As far as regulatory changes, I think those are more bound to administrations, and they kind of lag behind as well. It's like one administration does something, the
Yeah.
other one goes in and rolls it back, or vice versa. So I think,
Yep.
we are dictated to that, especially if you're working for a state agency or something to that effect, because then you are bound by NEPA, EPA, all of those things. But I definitely think companies are taking it seriously. ESG, environmental social governance, has been really, really big. That's kind of a buzzword from a couple years ago, but I know that it's not just a buzzword, because it's completely tied to investors now. A lot of people were not trying to invest in projects that didn't have a robust, ESG plan.
Oh,
So coming in to a community and saying, this is how we're going to ensure we don't impact, the salmon's run, or, but just not in words, but actually putting things in place, like tangible things in
yeah.
place. And not just because NEPA says you have to, but because these companies really do value,
Yeah.
these resources, and also the people. Alaska is a very environmentally conscious state, and also
Yeah.
we get a lot of attention based on the perception, anyway, of our pristine environment, right? It's very
Yeah.
big. A lot of it is I wouldn't say uninhabited, but it's just we have large swaths of land. And the
Yeah.
perception, I think, of the lower 48 is like, there's no one up there, keep it empty. And it's like, well, there are plenty of people up here who have been up here for quite some time. But, I do think we have an extra kind of lens, people making sure that we don't do anything to degrade our, environment, which is true. But I think
Yeah.
because of that, anyone getting a project in Alaska is also aware of that scrutiny, potential scrutiny. So I
Right.
think,
Yeah.
and I learned this a long time ago, actually, but Alaska's environmental protection laws came before the EPA laws. And that's just in
Oh,
the way that I think the people who were doing industry early on kind of valued Alaska to begin with, and realized that, like, hey, just because we want to do this doesn't mean we need to have tailings failures all over the state, and
yeah.
my knowledge, we haven't had a lot of those. So I think that's in part just because our standards are already really high. For example, Usabelli is a coal mine in Alaska, and they started doing reclamation before, because it's an old operation. They started doing that before the EPA like dictated that you had to. So it's out in
Wow.
Healy. And it's, again, I think it's because it was owned by people who worked in Healy, and they live there. So
Yeah.
it was like, I don't want to see this coal mine ruin the beautiful place in which I live and my neighbors and my family and
Yeah.
whatever. So the Usabelli family did a really good job and continues to do a really good job ensuring that that area, which it's near Fairbanks, so picturesque, like perfect Alaska, right? Like all the trees, and you can kind of see Denali in the distance. So it's
Oh,
beautiful.
wow.
So they knew that going into it though, and they do strip mining. Coal mining is, you see the seam, you take it, and that's it. So it can be the optics of that can look really gross because you see it and it's just like flat, all the trees are gone. Well, what they decided to do is to make sure that they're always planting native trees and stuff. That way, the turnover between when they mine and when the trees come back is very short. So you can look across, you can
Ah,
stand at the operation, look across the ridge. That used to be mined, and you can't tell anymore. It looks just like the other next ridge over.
wow.
Alaska, I think, and again, I don't know how well we've publicized that, but we really did set the precedence for the rest of the United States as far as how can we do mining responsibly. I think Nevada, Arizona, a lot of those states also do mining responsibly. I don't want to get any shade from them, but I think they just had it's more historical. They were doing things, before people knew about arsenic in the water and stuff like that. So I don't
Right.
think it's any fault
Yeah.
to them. They were just mining silver because that's what people did back then. But I think Alaska, being a little younger of a state, we haven't been mining as long. So I just think, and also where we are is, I think, like I said, a little more environmentally sensitive. So I do think that
Yeah.
we have always put the environment kind of at the forefront of mineral extraction. It goes, hand in hand.
Yeah, no, I didn't even think about that, about investors and what they care about, but
That's
that's very
huge.
important.
That's huge.
Yeah. And, we've had a few of these questions. We've highlighted the fact that these are people who are, working at these companies, working in these projects, these mining projects. But we did have a question that was, do you think these positions will be replaced by AI within the
Ooh.
next decade or
Well,
so?
I love AI. So, interesting question. I think it's going to be kind of a twofer because if we want more AI data centers, if we want more AI, period, that's going to be more electrification of things, which means more copper. These are very resource heavy. Tech sector is very resource heavy, so critical minerals will be big, not just the copper. But then, as far as will AI replace my job, as far as core logging and stuff like that goes, we already have machines that are capable of scanning full core runs and then analyzing them kind of like a big XRF and being able to say, oh, you have this parts per million gold or whatever.
Yeah.
That already exists. It's just expensive, and it's probably cheaper to hire one of us than it is to do that machine.
Oh,
What I will say though is AI is already being used in the mining industry in a plethora of ways, one of which is autonomous vehicles. Those are usually run with some type of AI technology behind them, and those have been around for quite some time. And then drilling exploration. So there's a couple of different companies that are around in the United States, and I'm sure abroad, I'm sure in China they're doing stuff like that too, but using AI to find new patterns in your data. And I was just looking into this for my thin sections actually, and I think this is one of the really cool applications for geologists and just scientists in general. It's helping us analyze these ridiculously large data sets. All we do all day long, whether you're, in geochem or whatever, we're collecting data constantly. And a lot of
yeah.
it, I feel like we can't see the patterns because we're so engrossed in what we're doing, or we already have our own biases about what the outcome should be or whatever. But I think
Right.
the potential for AI is so cool because it doesn't know those biases necessarily. Some of them it does, but I think, I have a professor who's a climate scientist, and he was like, I just put some of my data in there just to see. He was like playing around with some models just to see. But he said, it was sussing out patterns that I never would have thought of. Now, does he have to go and then ground truth those and see, are those patterns just noise or is that real? Of course. But I think that's wild that, like, this man has a PhD and has been doing this for decades. And this AI software that he was using, the LLM, was able to be like, hey, did you think about this? What about this relationship?
Yeah.
And same thing with my scans. I have 49 thin sections I am trying to analyze, and it's like, in theory, if I had a model trained for what I wanted, I could scan all of my slides and say, hey, please go analyze these now, these two separate images, and suss it out. What are you seeing? Are you seeing cross-cutting relationships that I can't see? Who knows?
Yeah.
So I do think it'll be good at that. The one thing I want people to not panic about, though, is I don't think that means it will replace you. Like geologist gone, AI robot in. I don't think it'll be that. I think it'll
Yeah.
be people who are AI literate working in tandem with traditional technical knowledge.
I
Yeah, I
agree.
think it'll hopefully be a joint effort, not hopefully a
Yeah,
replacing.
exactly. Exactly. I think it'll enhance what we did. I mean, it's like
Yes,
any other tool,
yes,
right? You know, when we got XRF, when we got mass spectrometers, like,
right,
yeah, it did a lot for us, but we still have to interpret what it's telling us and,
right.
like, you know, run it in a
And
way.
if
I
it makes
think,
sense or not, because
yeah,
AI will tell you some funky stuff, and I think a lot of people just assume because it says it that like, "Oh, AI said," it's like, "Well, is it right?"
yeah,
Like, did you you have to look at it, so, yeah, I
yeah,
definitely think the
yeah, for
interpretation
sure.
aspect of it all and that's, I think, why geologists are so invaluable in the first place is because getting data even is one thing. You can ping a rock with an XRF, and it'll tell you what's in there, but what does that mean? You know what I mean? Like,
Hmm.
you still have to have a
Yeah,
geologist that'll be able to decipher what does that 0.9% mean? Does it mean anything, you know? So,
yeah,
no
absolutely.
fear, people.
I think there will be plenty positions within the next
Yeah.
decade, but in 50 years, I don't know.
Yeah, we'll
We'll
see
see.
about that.
Um, but the next viewer question was, what are the biggest misconceptions about this career, about economic geology, that you can bust for
I
us?
like that. I will start with the fact that like we're not just pillage the planet, take all the things. I know a lot of people hear that and they're like mining in general, they're just like you're just putting holes everywhere. It's like no, no, no. I do want to bust that myth, I guess, that economic geologists care about the ones I've met anyway, including myself, but care about geology. That's why we're geologists. And for a lot of us, the economic part, I will speak for myself. Let me stop saying that. I will speak for myself. I was not really excited about the money part of it, the aspect of the money until much later. The business side of it didn't really interest me until I could understand it. But initially, I got into this because I think it's fascinating that these processes that occurred millions of years ago, sometimes billions, depending on where you are, deposited these minerals and they just sat in the
Yeah.
ground, for centuries. And also thinking about, human civilization and our indigenous brothers and sisters and how they were extracting mineral resources for centuries. And that's how we got to where we are today, So
Yeah.
civilizations around the world have been extracting resources since we, crawled out of the caves. And I think that's, the tie I feel to it though is that minerals and humanity are so intertwined. And it's like we wouldn't have a civilization, arguably, in any way you want to look at it. Even the indigenous civilizations were really dependent on copper and certain things to make tools and weapons, So I think that there's a really intimate relationship. And I think economic geologists kind of keep that going. But I
Yeah.
do not like when people assume that because I'm into things that make money that I don't care about the environmental impacts or the rocks that aren't, what we consider economically valuable. I like other minerals too.
No, I mean, it's so true. I think I know you're just speaking for yourself, but most of the geologists that I talk to are
Yeah.
just so passionate about geology.
Yeah.
And then they found a path in a specific industry. And yeah, maybe it makes more money than this one or that one. Like it, but it's like they're just passionate about the science
Yeah.
behind it. And it is really cool
It
science
is.
behind it.
It is.
But
I think that's the part that we have to remind ourselves too, because I think one of the things I didn't like as I was, especially in production, because production, we are feeding the mill. Like there are stocks on the line. Like there's a job to be done every single day, right? And then it becomes ore or waste because ore
mm,
feeds the mill, waste gets put on the road. You know what I mean? So, but that mindset really did start to break my little geologist heart after a while because I was like I would see cool stuff in the core, for example, and like say to my manager, like, hey, look at this. And it's like, we don't really care about that because it's not economic and we're not mining that fluorite that you just found. Like we call those gang minerals, you know what I mean? It's like that's garbage. Nobody wants. But I was young and I didn't really know what I was looking at half the time. But I remember just being like flabbergasted, like, you see this cool mineral? And they're like, yeah, okay, let's hematite, like move on with your life. So yeah, but just learning that like if it's not economically viable, we're not talking about it. And that's kind of comes with the territory. Like that's the job.
yeah.
But I
Yeah.
had to kind of get over that because I used to want to circle everything. And my logs when I first started were, I'm sure, like a thesis dissertation because I was just like so excited to be like, I see this, I see that. And they were like, hi, we're a gold mine though. we don't really care about
We
this.
don't care.
So yeah, I think dialing that in though, and just realizing that yes, we're not blood hungry, people, capitalists
Yeah.
necessarily, but I mean, the name of the game is making money for the
Yeah.
company,
Well,
paycheck,
actually,
whatever.
speaking of that, even though, yes, the geology is super fun, we did have some viewer questions about salary
Okay,
potentials.
let's hear
So
it.
if you're comfortable, like, what is the potential salary of an economic geologist? One viewer asked, is it, what it's the expected starting salary for somebody with a bachelor's versus somebody maybe that has a master's or PhD?
Yeah, I think you can get six figures out of it. A lot of us do rotational work, so you have to think about that. I always joke that I made what people make in a year and a half a year because I didn't work a whole year. And so that's
Oh,
typical, at least here in Alaska. Like I said, our drill programs, our drill seasons are shorter because of the weather. So usually
yeah.
we start drilling April, May, you're home before Christmas, and then you're off again until the next, following spring. And so when I started, I probably started out at like 70,000, 65,
Okay.
70. But I just remember, to me, that was good money. I come from like upper, lower
Yeah.
middle class. So to me, I was like, hey, I'm a millionaire. I can
And
pay
that
all
was with a
my bills.
bachelor's?
We're the bachelors, yeah, yeah.
Okay, wow.
And that was no job experience. I had never worked in a mine before. Geotemps paid me a nice pretty penny, I thought, for an entry level
Yeah.
position with no experience. I'd never logged for
Yeah.
before. So that was, I think, really cool. Exploration, and they are moving away from this. I think I'm seeing hourly rates come back, but from most of my career, you were on a day rate. So I did contracting a lot. So you work for a company on behalf of someone else.
Yeah.
A lot of us do that. It's just a lot easier. It gives you a lot more freedom too, and a little more mobility. You're not necessarily tied to a specific company forever. And you
Yeah.
also get, I think, chances to see more projects. Because like when I worked for this consulting company, he had contracts other places. So I'd work this project. And then if they needed a geologist somewhere else, I'd work over there under his company though. So that was really nice. But yeah, now I forget the question. I'm caught off my own tangent.
Oh no, you're good. You answered salary potential. I'm curious, is there a lot more potential for moving up or increasing that salary if you do go and get your master's or get your PhD? I know it used to be that PhD for industry was overqualified. Is
Yeah.
that still the case?
Yeah, and that's a great point to make because I had the same thought too because I was like, should I keep going or what?
Yeah.
I've heard, and this is just anecdotal, so don't quote, take me too far on this, but that petroleum is way more worried, or the requirements are that you will have a master's degree for an entry level position in petroleum. Mining is not like that from my experience, and I've only ever worked in Alaska and Canada, also full disclosure, so I cannot speak to the mining game anywhere else. But I do think you can definitely work your way up. If you want to be a chief geologist, you can definitely work your way up to doing that. Being aware, though, of what those tests then entail. I never really wanted to be in the office. And I realized, and I'm sure you can speak on
Yeah.
this too, but the more you advance your career in most industries, you go further away from what you started out doing. So I became a geologist because I like to actually be outside and touch the rocks. I find that the higher up you get in, let's say, exploration and economic geology, you're in an office, you're doing payroll, you're doing press releases, and those I'm sure are tantalizing and super exciting to the people who find that exciting. I did not think that would be how I want to spend my life. So I said middle management is about where I wanted to get. And
Yeah.
that's where I achieved. I was in charge of core yards and stuff like that, like other geos. And I was like, cool. I had responsibility, that kind of thing, but I didn't want to be the people who necessarily are in the office the whole time. But it's
Yeah.
definitely available, and it obviously coincides with salary. So the people who are making well above six figures are your chief geologists. Those are the people
Yeah.
who the most of the responsibility falls on their shoulders, but they're paid accordingly. So you have to kind of think about that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I've heard from people that say very similar things. The more they moved up, the less they got to go do the fun field things.
Hmm.
And they didn't like that. So they went back down. And, the salary's still comfortable enough. They're like, yeah, no, I'd rather do the things that I love for a
Yep.
little less.
Yep.
And that's fine with me. And then I've also heard from people that because it developed along with their life stage, they actually liked that they had their field days and then switched to office days because
Right.
they had a family and they didn't want to spend as much time in the field anymore. And so they liked that they could transition to this more office based job later in life. So I think yeah, again, it's really what you want to make it. You can move up that route or you can, stay in your little, fun geology route,
It's totally
which I
true,
think
and
is
it's also good to keep those options open, like, don't ever, like, pigeonhole yourself, I think a lot of people are like, "I'm gonna do this," and they're so set on it, and it's great to have a goal, I think, but let yourself be a little more fluid, especially in this industry, because there are so many opportunities coming up, especially with where we are with minerals, with critical minerals, so it's like, I foresee this
yeah,
being a nice chunk of the next 10 years where there's
yeah,
going to be new AI positions and like all this cool stuff that maybe didn't exist before. So, and I think now that I'm getting up there in age, the idea of hiking around for 12 hours a day, it's like I'm still into that, but my body physically is not on the same page as my brain. So, like you said, different life stages, you might want to then
yeah,
transition into something that's a little less impact on your knees or whatever. So
right.
I think, but
Literally.
I do think though that the industry does lend itself well to that transition to where like
Mhm.
just because you started off as a core logger doesn't mean you would be stuck doing that the rest of your life, unless that's what you want to do. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay, so I think we have a very good kind of context around the career, and now I want to switch gears to some of the science related questions. So many people were curious about just the science behind economic geology, as you and I are. And so one question was, do reserves have a definition that includes the economic viability of extraction? And if so, can you explain the difference between economically viable resources versus total resources still present?
yeah, I love that question. Oil and gas has that as well too. It's like the oil in place versus like bring it to the surface because the volume changes.
Right.
Minerals are not quite like that, which is nice for us.
Okay.
But yeah, we definitely classify our deposits. You can have your inferred, then you have your indicated, and then you can have your measured, and that's all based on historical data, current data, assay data. So taking your deposit and like this person was talking about, making it viable, making the argument that this isn't just a hole in the ground. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
This is something that we can actually extract. And it also ties into the commodity prices, like I talked about earlier in the game. It's like if gold is $100 an ounce, you could have a very nice, robust program. You could have high grade assay hits all day long. You know what I mean? And, saying, oh, we have gold potential here. But if the price is not high enough to justify the extraction, it's not happening. And that's kind of the
Okay.
name of the game,
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
that it's kind of a perfect, sweet spot of conditions where like the assays you have to be giving the right indicators that you do have something economically here, period. And then those have to kind of match with the timing of whatever commodity you're talking about. So,
Right. Right.
if gold is high and you have high assay values, well, then you're in the money. Now your deposit is worth something. But let's
Yeah.
say you have high gold prices, but you have low assay values. That's a problem. So it all has to kind of come together, which I think is kind of the beautiful part about projects when they finally do go into production, because a lot of stuff had to come into, perfect,
Right. Alignment.
right,
Yeah.
for it to actually happen. So yeah, but I like that question a lot. And there's deposits all over the world that have yet to be discovered. I mean, we have yet to
Right.
find every deposit known to man. You know what I
Right.
mean? So
Yeah.
who knows?
Yeah.
There could be, big deposits of all types of minerals out there.
Exactly. Let's get more geologists out there
Right,
mapping.
right.
You did briefly mention rare earths, so we did have another question about what are rare earth elements. We're hearing this term
Rare earths.
over and over then yeah, again these days, but why should we care?
Well, we should care, and they are the guys that don't get a lot of the attention, but are in everything. We all know about copper and like electricity, but a lot of these renewables, so a lot of our Teslas and the batteries that are used in a lot of electric vehicles need a lot of these kind of obscure minerals, not in great abundance. Like there might be a minuscule amount of that mineral in whatever you're talking about, but it is a critical component. Like the whatever we're talking
Yeah,
about won't work without this
without.
component. And same
Yeah.
thing kind of with the chips. Right now, there's like a big thing with these supercomputer chips, for the AI. Those are really mineral intensive. It's interesting because, again, we can extract these from existing deposits. You can get a polymetallic gold deposit that also has, rare earths in it. The deposit I'm working on right now. I mean, they're there, but it's just in a matter of like what abundance, like how much would it be viable to now say, oh, in
Right.
addition to gold, we can also extract some of these rare earths. But yeah, rare earths, you'll hear way more about them. And again, other countries have a greater concentration of these minerals, and that's problematic for us currently. So that's why you'll hear a lot more about rare earths, not necessarily because of their rarity, but because we need to make sure that we have a secured supply of those minerals
Yeah.
for if and when we
That was
need them.
actually one of the follow-ups on that question was why are there so few rare earth element deposits in the US? Is it just like you said earlier, the context of the geological processes that, built the different continents?
Yeah, I definitely think it's part of that. Another issue is not an issue. Another component would be how long it takes for us to get a mine into production. It's about 30 years from start to finish. Yeah, it's
Really?
quite long. That's like the average. And again, it
Wow.
fluctuates, I guess, under different administrations. The one we currently have is fast tracking a lot of projects. But yeah, it's a very slow roll game, and rightfully so, right? We want to do our due diligence. We
Yeah.
don't want to just say, okay, I found gold. Let's blast it and do whatever. Like we
Yeah.
don't want to do that. But there has to be perhaps maybe a different sweet spot for that, because that is something that I personally see as a challenge for the United States, is that we have the resources, I think, in a lot of ways, but to get them out of the ground takes quite a bit of time and money on that front as well. So if we could kind of speed up that process in any way, then we would at least be able to get those resources out and process them and stuff like that, because ore is also not really of use until you've smelted it. I didn't
Yeah.
realize this until I started working at a mine, but all the gold, becomes gold concentrate, and it looks like dirty sand. And then they put it in these big super sack bags, and then they ship it off to Taiwan or,
Yeah.
all these different countries who have smelters. And then
Yeah.
they smelt it. They give the mine their money for the gold, and then they actually keep a decent portion of whatever else is left over. So that's another issue, because the United States doesn't have a robust smelting. We lose out on the extra things that we're processing. That's problematic from a trade perspective and just an economic perspective in general, is that we're
Yeah.
losing out on potential profit that we could be keeping for ourselves, but we don't have the capacity really to do that. It's just like with oil. It's like you can
Yeah.
get crude, but you still have to refine it. So it's like, and
Exactly.
these refineries aren't
Yeah.
always here.
Yeah, no, I only learned this recently too, but even like what you were talking about earlier with whether it be gold or other economic minerals or critical minerals, like there are certain deposits in certain places, and so we're limited by where we can extract. But then the big bottleneck that I, recently learned about was more so refining than extraction. Like
Mhm.
even if we can extract it where we're at, do we have the capacity to refine it, or do we have to ship it off? So yeah,
Mhm.
that is I think a big bottleneck that
Yeah.
we have to work on. But just a couple more, and I know we're
No, this is,
late on time,
ooh, hey,
but
I love this.
just a couple more of the science related questions, then we'll
Yeah.
get to the last couple. But so right now this particular country has been in conversations a lot, and that is Greenland.
Oh gosh.
And so a lot of the questions we're wondering, many people in the news and whatnot have been asserting that Greenland has significant mineral and fossil fuel reserves. But one question or one viewer was wondering, how can we, one, know this if it's under a big ice sheet, and how can we extract it?
Well, I like that question. We have similar stuff happening in Alaska, as we have a lot of mineral deposits under ice sheets, under glaciers, and they are retreating, unfortunately, but there are resources. One of the big ways is geomagnetic surveys. And we do geomag surveys, aerial geomag surveys. They'll fly a plane, drone, whatever, and it'll pick up the magnetic anomalies underneath the
Okay.
ice. And so I know that's kind of like, how can you see through there? But it's like
Yeah.
these are lasers. They can punch through all types of things. But
Okay.
yeah, it's actually really cool, because then they are able to see what's under the ice and in the subsurface, and then drill. And I know it sounds crazy, but people can drill through ice. I've heard lots of stories from drillers, especially in Canada, drilling through glaciers and things like that. So I know they can. I know it's also probably technically very challenging just to do that, but I think from what I've gathered, a lot of the talk is about, like, once these ice sheets retreat, or as they retreat, they are exposing land, and that's the land that you can then drill on and explore and soil sample and do whatever you're going to do the same way you would do anywhere else. But I think the
Oh,
geomag survey is probably how they're able to at least see the
yeah.
anomalies ahead of time, and then maybe make the plan around that. And also I think just like your just basic like historical geology, just knowing like where that region is, like gold deposits, at least the ones like I work on, a lot of them came about late Cretaceous. So if you like want to use that as a constraining time, then you can kind of go and see, okay, like where was Greenland at that time, where was blah blah blah,
Right.
and kind of step it back
Right, right,
that
right.
way.
We can get a lot from just geological context of knowing,
Exactly.
like, yeah, where Greenland was as a landmass at
Right.
certain times
Right.
in Earth's history and what deposits it should have based on
Exactly.
that.
And then kind of go from
Um,
there. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And I did want to follow up on that. It is kind of sad, I feel like, that we are banking on glaciers melting to say that we'll take
I
it.
know.
But
You're
yeah,
like,
no,
is that what
that's
we
a
should be
crazy
doing? We're like,
concept.
maybe we don't.
I mean, I know it, well, I don't want to sound like, negative or
No, you can. It's
pessimistic, but
okay.
I know it's a very realistic scenario that yes, the glaciers are melting, but oh my God, that's
I know.
a,
And
a sad
it
prospect.
is. And it's also really sad too, because I think, is that going to kind of cause a feedback loop of some sort, where it's like they retreat, we find new huge deposits, we mine more, we build more, we do more, so it's like, are we going to use the newfound resources to like build new green technology, or are we just going to use it to
Yeah,
like boost our economy? I mean, that's, I think, the question as to what we do with the resources too, how we manage
matters. Hmm.
our resources, I think, is a people conversation, not a geo
Yes.
conversation. But I definitely, I,
Yes.
I do feel tied to that in the sense that like, just because we can doesn't mean we should all the time. And I think we do have to be at least aware with the game plan of like, okay, we're going to extract these minerals, but then for what? To
Yeah.
justify like
Yeah.
what environmental
No,
things we might potentially be doing.
I think you're so right. I think where, we find the minerals, how we find them, how we extract them, that's all geologists, right? But then like the what we do with them and what minerals we want for what purposes, like
Hmm.
that is a people thing and that
Yeah.
is dependent often on the administration and
I
that's
know. I'm like, no,
yeah.
more
So,
geologists. Maybe we all need to run
yeah.
for office or something. I don't know. But I do think that science
I don't know about
literacy would
that.
be, I do think that that's the one thing, like kind of like industry and academia too. I think we have to work together. So it's like,
Mhm.
we can have policymakers, but they do need a little bit of science literacy because they're making decisions,
Yes.
based on these things. And I'm like, sometimes I'm like, I'm like,
Yeah.
we need people who actually like understand these concepts. So I do hope that as time goes on, that we at least are bringing in technical people to aid these people who might not be as technical in making these decisions that are like impacting everyone.
Yeah, no, I just had somebody on that was a submarine volcanologist, and he
Cool.
talked about the importance of one, the researchers, but also science communicators
Mhm.
and science policy workers,
Yeah.
people that are the scientists, but also reach across, that bridge and communicate the science that's going on and the importance of it and the directions we should be going to the policymakers. And that's important in every single field
Yeah.
of geoscience and sciences in general. So, yeah,
Totally.
could not agree more with that. And the last science related question we have is what do you think about mining asteroids or the moon?
I have a lot of planetary geology friends, so I probably shouldn't say this, but to speak to what you just talked about, like our environment and protecting it and not digging under the glaciers and stuff. If we, and this is again unsolicited, just my opinion, but if we could figure out how to do it, I think recovery and obviously bringing it back to be logged or whatever would be quite the challenge. But if we could do it in lieu of digging on our planet, I say go for it. A lot of these, are asteroids are like iron, so it's like
Yeah.
we need steel, we need all the things. If we wanted to mine that, I think that's better than maybe mining it out of Canada or somewhere else, and these maybe larger resources. I think you would run into issues as to like who owns it. Would it be the
Yeah.
United States owns that asteroid? I doubt the rest of the world would let that
Well,
happen. Like, I think it would have to be like, this is the world's copper resource or whatever. But I think
yeah.
how you would manage that in space would be challenging. But in theory, are there resources in space? 100%. Do we
Yeah.
currently have the technology to extract them? I don't think so.
Yeah.
but in our lifetime, in our, future, probably, I think that we are always,
Yeah.
same thing with deep sea mining, because I equate the ocean with space as far as what we know about it. But deep sea mining is definitely on the table these days. There was a
Yeah.
company the other day that actually just put out a proposal to NOAA to do a permit for drilling. So, I mean, people 100 years ago did not think that was viable and did not think we could do that responsibly. And who knows if we can. But this company is seeking a permit to see if that's possible. That, I think, will be a good case study for space, because if they can say we can extract, this gold from this hydrothermal vent in the bottom of the ocean and not hurt the little shrimp and whatever else, and the pressure and like all of that stuff that'll be on the drills, then yeah, I think you could then make the case of what would this be like in zero gravity. But I do think before we see asteroid mining, I think we'll see deep sea mining, which is
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah, there's
a little more
it's
serious.
it is, and there's a lot of opinions around
Oh
that.
yeah.
I don't have the expertise to speak on it, but I made some videos on the actual like geochemistry of like polymetallic nodules, and I had people
Yeah.
ask me my opinions on the mining. And honestly, I don't know the answer, because like there are a lot of important metals in there that could help go to,
Right.
clean energy and stuff. But
Right.
then, there's also environmental and ecosystem considerations. But then at the same time, like the environment that these nodules form in is pretty open
It's like
ocean, like
abyssal plain, like
desert.
there's
I
nothing
mean, yeah, like biodiversity in the ocean is like margins. It's on
yeah.
the continental margins.
Right.
And where these nodules form requires very deep and still and not a lot
Yeah, they're out there.
happening type,
Yeah.
seafloor environment. And that, yeah, there's some microbes and shrimp and stuff, but maybe it's better that we mine there instead of elsewhere where there
Right.
are more, diverse ecosystems. I don't know the answer, but
But that's a totally honest,
I
I think, interpretation. And I appreciate you for being honest, because I think that a lot of people, especially SGOs, they want us to be like, say you hate it or you don't, and it's like, and I'm not doing that. And
yeah,
I appreciate you for not doing that either, because I think that's not fair to
yeah.
the issue at hand. And I think we all deserve to like take a minute. We don't have to make a decision today,
Well, I
like,
had a whole video that I made that was titled something like "Nothing is black or white," because
yes.
a lot of people want the yes or no or bad or good,
And it's
and it's
not.
like, guys, everything's gray.
Yeah.
Like everything is gray, and
100%.
there's so much of a spectrum with regards to whether it be, polymetallic nodule mining or anything in
Yep.
geology. Like everything is gray. And like you said, sometimes things depend just solely based on the price of things at that moment. Like,
Hmm.
like it could be a yes the year prior and then a no the
Oh,
next year. Like
100%. Or geopolitical
it's,
tensions, you know what I mean? I mean, my
yeah,
goodness, we don't have to get into it, but there's a lot going on in the world right now. And it's like, if this continues, you know what I mean? Then certain countries might say, well, hey, the antimony thing happened last year, and it was like China definitely was like, we're done. We're no more antimony. And it sounds like, oh, okay, that's one mineral, whatever. But like they were the biggest exporters to us of that one mineral. Now we have to think about where we're going to get it from. So there could be other
yeah,
minerals like that on the list at some point that may be more important to us than antimony, where another country might say, you know what, I'm done supplying this to you. Go find your own source. And at that
yeah,
point, our country is going to have to figure that out. And I'm sure you're aware too, we have rights, mineral rights essentially on the outer perimeters of our continent. And so, and China does, and Russia and Greenland and all these countries do too. So, we are exploring though offshore resources or offshore potential. I
yeah,
just gave a
yeah,
talk not too long ago to a group of folks about offshore mineral resources, and we have a lot of different choices, right, of where we can get them. Like you mentioned, the nodules, that's one. There's also the smokers, so we have potential to extract resources from different places. But I do think, like what you were saying, we don't need to necessarily rush into that. We can kind of take our time, bring academia into it, make sure that we're
yeah.
really doing this in the appropriate way. And from what
Well,
I've gathered,
that's,
I see that. But again, it's just
yeah,
not publicized. It's
yeah.
not on the nightly news. So it's like people don't really hear about it.
Well, and that's the reason that the bridge between research and, industry is so important.
Yes.
That bridge between research and industry is how we know whether things, what should be extracted, where we should extract it from, and what environments need more protection versus don't,
Right.
what environments are more vulnerable versus aren't, or more robust, and could handle that. Like
Right.
all of this comes back to we need the bridge between research and industry, and we need the bridge between industry and research
Yeah.
and policy. Like
Yeah.
we need those bridges in
All
place to
together.
make, yeah, It's just like that's so true, so true.
No, you're
And
spot on.
on the mining asteroids and moons things, I agree with everything you said, and also just want to add the context. I did have a scientist who's working on the Psyche mission to the asteroid Psyche, who's like,
Woo!
which is all metal, like a metal planetary core. It's really cool.
That's sweet.
I had him on a video, God, I don't know, months ago now, and so I'll link that below if you guys are curious to check it
Yes.
out. But it was so interesting because he also mentioned this prospect of mining the asteroid because obviously it's fully metal.
Hmm.
And one article actually like publicized it, and of course had a headline of like, this asteroid, its metal resources are worth some big number that I don't even know. It
Right,
had a
right.
lot of zeros.
Astronomical,
I don't
probably.
even know what to call the number. It was like
Right.
gazillion dollars it was worth. And so it had its like big value on the headline of the article. And David, the guy I had on talking about it, was like, it's actually funny because if we did end up like mining that, bringing it back to Earth, it would then be worth a lot less
Right.
because the value would go way down.
Right, right.
So like everything's like relative.
It is. Well, and that's a really good point you brought up too, about economic geology. That is the name of the game, right? Scarcity is what drives these commodity prices where they are. If gold wasn't so rare or whatever, then it
Yeah.
wouldn't, it wouldn't be at $5 grand an ounce right now. You know what I mean? So it is kind of this weird game. And I think that's something I urge anyone who wants to get in economic geology, get on Bloomberg, go to, finance.com, find a place that talks about commodities from a purely economic standpoint. And then you'll kind of understand like why we're all really doing this. And it kind of bummed me out
Yeah.
initially, but it's like, I had to become an adult and realize like, well, honey, this is how the world works. Like this is
Yeah.
capitalism. Like, we all work to feed the machine. And so this is kind of
Yeah.
part of that. It's like a big part of it actually. And we back a lot of what we do with gold, with, silver. And that's another reason why it's so precious to us and why it has the value that it has. But yeah, I think that people have to remember that if we have too much of it, it's not rare anymore. It's not, if everyone has gold, then the price of gold is nothing. So it's
Yeah.
like that's a good point though. I'm glad he brought that up because yeah, I think people do forget about that. The scarcity though and volatility
Yeah.
in markets, but the scarcity of these resources is actually what keeps their prices high.
Yeah, for
We
sure,
kind of
for
like
sure.
that.
So, yeah, no, I think this was such an amazing
Oh
conversation. So,
yay.
lastly, I just want to have you, we had tons of questions about economic geology in general, but you also have this company that you now run, which is
Yeah.
super exciting, Nuna. So, can you explain kind of what this company is, what
Yeah.
inspired you to start it, its
Sure.
mission, its purpose? Yeah, I'd love to hear
Yeah,
about
so
it.
Nuna means land in Inupiaq and Yupik and some other
Oh,
indigenous
cool.
Alaskan dialects. And I just wanted to give a respectful nod to the communities up here and the land in which I live and work. But it started out just because I wanted something to do, in my off season time. And so I started doing social media for one of my bosses and I enjoyed it. And it was just nice because I loved his company. I worked for his company. I would take pictures, at site and then I would get to go and then make that into LinkedIn content and stuff. And then later on, when I was in grad school, grad school, as you can tell everyone, is not lucrative. So do not go to grad school if you want to be rich, unless you're rich later, I should say. But I needed something to kind of supplement my income. I was a graduate teaching assistant, which was amazing. I loved it, but again, not super lucrative. And I'm an adult. I'm not a 20-some-year-old kid anymore. So I have real adult bills. So I was like, I need to make some money. So I decided to start a company. And I thought, well, why don't I just keep doing social media management for oil and gas and mining companies because we have quite a robust petroleum industry here in Alaska. So I thought I'll just do extractive industries as a whole. And then I got to thinking, like, why don't we have more geologists as marketers for the industry? Because a lot of people don't know how to properly, my opinion, properly represent our industry or what we do because they've never done it. Because they're marketers,
Yeah.
they're PR people, which is fine that they're not bad people, but they just don't have the same lived experience. So I was like, well, maybe I could use that, as like my niche or something. And it really resonated with people. And then I started my company in 2024. So we're almost 2 years old here coming up.
Oh,
But
cool.
I couldn't find pictures of Black female geologists, and I was real chuffed about it. And so I was like, well, except for like just pictures of myself, but I was like, this is crap. So I said, well, I'm going to use AI to make this person because I needed an image for something. And then I really kicked off and I thought, well, I can make AI videos, I can do AI images of all types of stuff to now convey our industry and what we do in a way that we couldn't do before and make it
Yeah.
fun and more engaging for young people. Like, we gripe a lot about young people aren't into oil and gas, they're not into mining for a plethora of reasons. But I think a lot of times it's just because when we talk about it, it's a snooze fest and nobody wants to listen to that, you know? So I was like, how can I, elevate what's happening with technology?
Yeah.
So it kind of was born with all of that. But yeah, it's been really great, and it's kind of shocked me in the sense that it's taken off, and I have clients now outside of the state of Alaska, which is cool. And just people understanding that there are tools at our disposal now that we didn't have before, and what are different ways we could use those to, aid our communication. Like, you're, with your PhD, I don't know if you're teaching right now or not, but I made an app the other day, and it was like a simple, like, gold panning, like, Oregon Trail kind of thing. But I was thinking the other day, it's like, had I been teaching, full term, full time, I could make games. You can make apps now. Like, I've only taken one
Yeah.
Java class. You don't even need to know how to do Python. Like, you can make an app now that could teach your kids about anything. So I'm like, we're at a time where, like, literally anything is possible, and I'm hoping to, help champion some of that. So geologists aren't afraid of AI and realize that in a lot of ways, this can make our industry a lot better in all of our disciplines. I don't think it's
Yeah.
just specific to economic geology either.
No, I agree so much. I think one, I applaud you for trying to combat the one misperceptions around, just mining in general and extractive industries in general. Like you said, people tend to either think it's, bad or just boring,
Mhm.
which, like, yeah, that's often it is portrayed kind of in school. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, minerals,
But
everyone hates mineralogy. And I'm like,
I know. I know. So no, I think that is so important. And I also applaud you for the AI aspect is something that you're so right. So many people are kind of afraid of it. I mean, even I like there's a lot of stigma and there's
Mhm,
also just a lot of unknowns
mhm.
about, how it works and the information it provides and like all of that, but trying to like we talked about earlier, utilizing it as a tool to enhance what we're already doing and
Right.
just speed up our own processes and work toward this positive mission, but like utilizing it alongside that, it can be so powerful for
Yeah,
so many things and like
absolutely.
things we could never do before.
No.
So
Yeah, I'm able to do, like, site visit flyovers and stuff like that. People can just send me still images, and I can animate them now using AI. Nobody has to hire a drone or do any of that. I mean, you're cutting costs, you're making sure people are safe now. You don't have a film crew walking around everywhere. You don't need that
yeah,
distraction. So there's a lot of positives that can just come from little things like that. But I think it's a matter of
yeah,
being open-minded enough to, like, think about the applications versus some people I think are already kind of turned off, which is understandable. I'm
yeah,
not a huge, like, AI is perfect, just like with mining, right? I think,
it's
everything has
gray.
its yeah, everything has its things where you're like, oh, but on
It's
the
not
same
black and
token,
white.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. And I think, as it evolves, I think some of those problems will be worked out, but we're just at the infancy, I think, of it right now. So we
yeah.
have to work some of the kinks out, and we haven't, obviously, in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
So
no, I completely agree. Completely agree. So, the last couple questions I always love to ask is what is your favorite part of your job and what's your least favorite part of your job? And
oh,
this can, I guess you can answer for economic geology when you were really, engaged in that
yeah.
versus, grad school, whatever you're
Totally.
feeling.
Yeah. Oh God, grad school. Um, it's like now I'm triggered. My favorite part of being an economic geologist, like working on projects, especially, is the people and like the ruggedness of it all. Like, it's kind of like adult summer camp or something. Like, I don't know. It's like when I was just in Canada, it was a super small project, and they were finishing up their winter drill program, but less than like 20 people were at that camp. And so these are people you see literally all day, every day. And, getting to know them and them getting to know you and the conversations you have over breakfast and then finishing it up at dinner. They're very intimate spaces because,
Yeah.
there's not a lot of people there. There's not a lot of infrastructure. We were in Arctic tents, you have roommates. I was really excited. My roommate at the end was a young woman who had just graduated with her geology degree. It was her first core logging job. So it was just
Oh,
really cool
wow.
and kind of full circle. I felt very old. But, sitting and talking to her late at night in our tent about her career ambitions and what she wants out of life and listening to me, I guess, give advice, which was weird. But, it's the relationships, honestly. Like, that's the other thing. I think mining has such a weird stigma about like everyone's tough and everyone's just like get the gold or whatever, but it's not really. It's like I'd say it's more close to like the military. It's like you're all out in the middle of usually remote areas, and that's all you have is other people around you. Cell service is
Yeah.
not always there. You won't always have good Wi-Fi. Most of the times you will. But yeah, I think the relationships that you form with the people you work with, those are the things I cherish the most. And it's like a common goal. I said the military is one place, and I think mining is the other, where it's like everyone comes together to do one thing. Like we all come together to drill. Whether you're
Yeah.
drilling or not, you're still there supporting the drilling. It's like we are all
Yeah.
there to make sure that the core comes out, the geos can log it, it gets sent out. That's it. Like the cook even is there to support that operation. So it's
Yeah.
like we're all on the same page. And I feel like rarely in life, especially, in this country, are we all like unified on a common goal? You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's really kind of
Oh,
beautiful to
so
see. And
true.
I love that.
Yeah, no, I love that. Oh my gosh, that's so true. And do you have a least favorite part? Is it
I would
writing?
I would say least favorite, being away from loved ones. I'm not married anymore, but when
Mm,
I was married, I will say, especially newly married, like I got married in 2016. I started mining in 2017. So it's like we moved pretty quickly. But yeah, for new people, especially those of you who have spouses or something like that, children, that is something that I would definitely think about. Talk to somebody who's worked in that industry, talk to people in your HR, whatever. But that can be, I would say, honestly, that's probably the most challenging part from my perspective for anyone, is being away from your family in whatever capacity that looks like for you. But that was
yeah.
really taxing on our marriage, and nobody
Mm.
really prepared me for that. It wasn't until I actually got into mining where everyone's like, oh, do you know geologists have the highest divorce rate? And I was like, what? And I looked into it, and it's like, it's true. But I think it's in part to a
Oh,
lot of us, depending on like what you do, whether that's petroleum, economic geology, whatever, but we travel a lot. The rocks
yeah.
aren't usually in your hometown, unfortunately. So that means you have to be gone, rotations, whatever. And that can be a lot. So I just caution folks, if they're already struggling with that or think that could be something that would be a challenge, to really look into that, because you have to think about not only yourself, but what's that going to do to the other person who is also alone.
Yeah,
So yeah, I think
absolutely.
that looking back on it, especially, I just wish I would have thought about that a little more thoroughly, because I didn't really think. I was just so excited to go to work. I was like, I'm going to work. I have a geology job. But yeah, that is being away from people. It's like you don't
Yeah.
get homesick necessarily, but I've done a 3-week hitch, and that's a long time to be away from your home and your bed and the
Yeah,
things that make you feel safe. And, so that can be
for sure.
an adjustment.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
For sure. No, I definitely think it's a consideration like we talked about before. You kind of have to think about the path you'd rather go on.
exactly.
I know I've had, environmental consultants, Grace on to talk about she loved the field. She was in the field every other week. She was going on these multi-week projects and everything, but she was also like young, just
Yep.
graduated, didn't have anybody holding her back
Right.
or
Perfect
anybody to
time.
go home. She was so excited to go out. And then I had another environmental consultant on, Crystal, to talk about her. She was the one that was kind of like, yeah, I'm at a point now where I don't go into the field more. I've moved up in management, and
Hmm.
that's actually worked for me because I have a family
Right.
and I have these people that I don't want to leave for months at a time or weeks at a time.
Right.
So, yeah, I definitely think that's something can consider and then choose a path accordingly,
Totally.
whatever that might be.
And I
So,
will say the mining industry is very family friendly. Like, I think they do really work hard, even in production, at making sure your schedules fit, the lifestyle that you want. I know a lot of people who
yeah.
work in mining here in Alaska don't live here. So they're traveling outside of the state as well. But they really do take time to make sure that people are putting their families first. And another thing they started doing, just like a little side rant, but some mining companies recently have started doing family days. So they're like
Oh,
bringing people's
cool.
families to the site so they can actually like tour the mine, see where their family works and stuff like that. And so I think after COVID, a lot of companies are picking that back up again. So that's been really,
Yeah.
I think, a nice initiative too, just because a lot of times, it was really hard for me to convey to my spouse like what I did all day. It's like, and
Yeah.
to your spouse, you're gone. They don't know what you're doing for 12 hours, for weeks on end. So I think that'll be really cool if more companies start doing that, just so people can see, your kids can see like, oh, here's where my mom works. Like, how cool. So
Oh,
I think some
yeah,
of that
that
will
is
help the perception because, yeah, we don't really see that on TV or anything like that. So people really have no idea what underground even looks like, you know?
so true, so true. That's really
Yeah.
cool. Well, thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
taking
It's
so
like a
much time
dream.
to talk to me about this at 6 a.m. your time. So, thank you for that. I think this added so much context around
Awesome.
so many questions that people had, including myself. So, I think this will be really insightful and hopefully inspiring for people that might be wondering whether this kind of career path or something similar might be for them. So,
Yes, please join the mining community. It's fun, I promise.
that doesn't sound creepy at
I
all.
know. Come join the mining community.
Come on.
Come on.
Oh
No,
my
I will
God.
say though,
No.
and whatever you do, just stick with geology. We are losing geologists, period. It doesn't matter what discipline you're talking about right now, actually, which is really unfortunate, but we just need more geoscientists, period. So whatever component about geosciences gets you going, like this has always made me happy to get out of bed in the morning. So that's how you know this is what you should be doing. So I just hope that for all of you undergrads and stuff out there, just find that thing that gets you excited every day and then go do that. Go make money doing that.